Hello guys and welcome back to Fourth Down Fantasy. I don't want to bore you with an intro this time, so let's get right into it. The doors to the hype house are wide open, and no, I'm not talking about TikTok. If you've heard of that hype house, I'm not talking about the doors to my house because there's not a whole lot of hype here. It's very boring, we're quarantined, all that fun stuff. What I mean when I say hype house is I mean all of these puff pieces that are coming out from training camps and practices that are making players all sound like they're the next Randy Moss or the next LaDainian Tomlinson, all because they made one nice play in practice and they're, tweeting eye emojis and whatever else is going on. We have to figure out, like I mentioned in the first episode, a way to break these news pieces down and figure out what's fluff and what is actual substantive information you can use on draft day. So what I've done is I've gotten 6 players who I've seen at least a little hype from. Some of them I've seen a stupid amount of hype about, and I just want to get into them, tell you guys what I think, let you guys make your own decisions about what you think of these players, because their hype, some of them especially, is getting out of control. Number one, also let me just say this first. I'm not including Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this, and I'm not including Miles Sanders in this. They both probably have the most hype of any player this fantasy preseason. And I love both guys. I think everybody should love both guys. I don't want to spend a lot of time saying why everybody should love both guys, but basically both in great offenses, both have a very clear path to touches, both have good to better than average offensive lines, and I think they're both going to be great. I think they're both RB1s, and I think you should consider taking them anytime after the RB3 spot. Anyway, let's get into this. The number one other guy that I've been seeing too much hype from, but that I actually like as a player overall, is Antonio Gibson. Now, Antonio Gibson's ADP has risen quite a bit throughout this training camp and this preseason, even though there's no preseason games, it's still preseason. It's risen to about round 8 to 12, and that's for a guy who you really can't project how many touches he's gonna have in his own backfield. But let's go through why his ADP has gone up so much. So number one is obviously the unfortunate situation surrounding Derrius Guice. Now, Guice is out of that rotation. He's no longer a cog in that backfield. And while he was in that backfield, it was sort of just a lot of names and you didn't really know how to separate them. You figured Guice was probably going to be the guy. Now, no one's really sure what's going to happen throughout the season. The one thing we can bank on right now, most likely, is that Adrian Peterson is going to start the year as the starting running back, as that early down guy. Beyond that, we don't know. We don't know who's going to be the third down back. We don't know who's going to potentially seize the job as the season goes along. But a lot of people are really hoping that that's going to be Antonio Gibson. Even if it's not Antonio Gibson, even if he doesn't seize the role, if he doesn't become a 3-down back, he could have value. And one of the other drivers that's leading to his ADP going crazy is because his head coach is Ron Rivera, who has himself made a comparison between Antonio Gibson and Christian McCaffrey. Now, that is not to say that he thinks, or that anyone else thinks, Antonio Gibson is going to be Christian McCaffrey. All it means is that he believes they have similar skill sets and are at least good at similar things. Obviously, McCaffrey's going to be great at those things, and Gibson may just be okay at those things. That's still a really good baseline for a guy in terms of fantasy success. Now, why do I like Antonio Gibson as a player? First of all, he's on a team that is likely going to be coming from behind quite a bit. Washington is not expected to be very good, and Antonio Gibson can contribute in a lot of different ways. If he is going to be being used as a receiver, which he has been working with both the running backs and the wide receivers with Washington, that's a really good benefit for him, and that could lead to fantasy success, especially in PPR leagues. If he's going to be versatile and used all over the field, I think he is a guy you would want to target as a super high upside player later in your drafts. Now, the one caveat with him is you don't want his ADP to get out of control, because like I said, it's been steadily rising, and if you have to spend, God forbid, like an actual starting flex spot in a 12-team league, even if you've already filled your QB and tight end, don't do that. I think that price is just too rich for me. But if you can get him as, your maybe 3rd, 4th bench spot, that's huge value, because we don't know how this backfield is going to break down. If he profiles even a little bit like Christian McCaffrey, I mean, that's a win. And he's really only got to beat out an aging Adrian Peterson, who most people seem to think is going to sort of phase out as the season goes on, and Bryce Love, who I also like sort of as a sleeper, but doesn't seem to have the versatility that Antonio Gibson does. So I think that Antonio Gibson while he doesn't profile as a starting 3-down running back, he could produce for your fantasy team enough, and the ceiling is there. You know, if guys get hurt, if he proves that maybe he is a 3-down back, you never know. It's worth it. And don't worry about his 33 carries career at Memphis. Don't worry about people comparing him to Darwin Thompson. People are doing that, by the way. They're saying that, you know, he's got that sort of crazy camp hype that Darwin Thompson had, and look at Darwin Thompson. Well, Darwin Thompson was 5'8", 200 pounds and had, you know, Damien Williams in front of him, and then they signed LaShawn McCoy. Antonio Gibson is 6 foot 220 and has an unproven second-year Bryce Love and very, very old Adrian Peterson ahead of him. Very different situations. So if you want to send that risk on Antonio Gibson, I don't blame you. Just watch the ADP. Don't let it go absolutely through the roof. If you can get him as your, you know, like I said, mid-bench spot, I would definitely go for it. Next, we've got Breshad Perriman, and I cannot for the life of me figure out why he is going so late in draft. It feels like nobody remembers the end of last season from week 13 to 17, where he was wide receiver 3 in terms of points. Wide receiver 3. Now, I know Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were hurt. This is Perriman was on the Bucs last year. And Jameis, we know, loves to air it out. We know the Bucs play from behind all the time. But Breshad, if you watched him at the end of last season, and I did, he looked like he put it together finally. This was a guy that, you know, was on the Ravens and we thought could potentially be productive as a really high-end wide receiver, and then he just kind of wasn't. And then now something clicked. I don't know what it was at the end of last season, but he looked like a different player on the field. He looked like he really knew what he was doing, basically. And now he steps into a spot on the Jets, who will likely also be playing from behind quite a bit, have a quarterback that people think is hopefully going to keep taking maybe another step or two forward. I don't think anybody wants to write off Sam Darnold, despite the fact that he was seeing ghosts last year. You know, a quarterback that can take a step forward, a team that lost Robbie Anderson. There's targets up for grabs there. There's touchdown potential up for grabs there. And I don't understand why he's going, what is he ranked? Breshad Perriman is ranked 123rd overall on ESPN. He's going in the double-digit rounds. You can get him for your bench comfortably. And this is a guy who was wide receiver 3 for 5 weeks, guys. And he's going on benches. Drafts this guy. Next is a name that I'm really mad that I even have to say to you guys, because I didn't think this guy would be discussed in terms of fantasy ever, and I figured I would never have to worry about him. But here we are. Robert Tonyan is actually being talked about for fantasy. And ESPN actually wrote an entire article on him saying that could he be the Packers' next George Kittle? And this is all predicated on Packers head coach Matt LaFleur saying that Tonyan absolutely has a chance to start. Now, is it moderately interesting that he has a chance to start over a promising second-year tight end that a lot of people thought might be productive in Jace Sternberger? Sure it is. Does that mean I think Tonyan is going to be George Kittle or even be a remotely productive fantasy tight end? Absolutely not. Aaron Rodgers' last productive fantasy tight end was Richard Rodgers in 2015 when he had 510 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. Before that, it was Jermichael Finley. Those are really the only 2 tight ends Rodgers has ever had that have produced in a fantasy sense. And that's including him having Jared Cook, who is now, you know, pretty darn good on the Saints, and in a Jimmy Graham who, while he was aging, you would still expect Rodgers to get a little more out of him, or the Packers overall to get a little more out of him. Now I'm supposed to buy that Robert Tonyan is going to break that trend where Richard Rodgers was the last good one that Rodgers has had, and that was 5 years ago. Where I'm expecting Tonyan to break that trend? No. There's so many good late round tight ends this year, guys, that it's not worth it. And, you know, obviously Tonyan is literally free in drafts despite this hype. The reason I'm talking about him is because I don't think he was even remotely on radars before this, but now there's articles being written comparing him to George Kittle. So, no, spend your late round, if you're waiting on tight end, spend your late round tight end pick on a guy like Noah Fant, on a guy like Mike Gesicki, TJ Hawkinson, Hayden Hurst. I think Hurst might be going a little bit higher than those guys, but you get the point. Ignore the Tonyan. Please don't draft Robert Tonyan for all of our sake. Just leave him alone. Next, we've got Scotty Miller, Buccaneers wide receiver, firmly 3rd on the depth chart, and yeah, firmly third on the depth chart, guys. Scotty Miller's popping up because of the supposed connection with Tom Brady. You know, Brady's hitting him a lot in practice for touchdowns and nice catches and little quick hitters and saying stuff like, "Good job, Scooter." That, yes, that was actually reported that he said that to him. People are starting to hype that it could be the next Wes Welker or Julian Edelman. Gee, I wonder why people are saying that. Guys, I don't know how to break this to you. Tom Brady's Wes Welker or Julian Edelman in this offense is Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin finished as the overall wide receiver 2 last season, and Chris Godwin ran 50% of his routes from the slot last year. That's going to be the guy that Brady targets early and often. I like Scotty Miller as a real-life asset for the Buccaneers. I do believe there's something to be said about the connection between Brady and Miller, and that Brady, you know, sees himself in other underdogs like Scotty Miller coming from small schools. But in terms of fantasy production, there's too many mouths to feed in that offense, and Chris Godwin is going to be the primary target, most likely, in terms of, you know, between the 20s. After that could be Evans, Gronk, OJ Howard, Cameron Brate even. No, leave Scotty Miller. There's other better flyers you can take. In fantasy, volume is king, and there's other guys with way better pass to volume than Scotty Miller. So again, Scotty's another guy that up until this point was probably free in drafts and would probably be on waiver wires. Make sure he stays on those waiver wires. Don't be the guy that drafts him off this hype. And let somebody else do that if they're going to do that. You should be taking the guys like Breshad Perriman. Next is a guy that I actually liked up until recently. Now, I'm a Patriots fan, so I try to stay as unbiased as possible, and I think I've successfully done that with this. This guy is Damien Harris. Now, I liked Harris up until recently because Sony Michel's health status was more unclear than it is now. Sony began training camp on physically unable to perform list. Now he is potentially going to be ready for week 1. We don't know for sure, but that's now in the cards, and it didn't seem likely before. So that makes Damien Harris's path to touches just way more difficult because there's already so many solid running backs on this roster and just solid real-life producers like James White, Rex Burkhead. They just signed Lamar Miller. They've even got J.J. Taylor, who's getting Dion Lewis comps from Patriots running backs coach Ivan Fears. The fact that Harris is sharing a depth chart with so many either proven or speculative receiving backs and now has to deal with Sony Michel also being healthy, it's getting harder and harder to see a path where Damien Harris is relevant in fantasy, even if he manages to get a few, you know, first and second down reps here and there. I don't foresee it being worth it, even though he's going so late in drafts. I think there's better flyers, better guys that you can bank on maybe falling into a larger amount of playing time than what Damien Harris is going to likely have with Sony Michel healthy. Now, of course, Sony Michel's health is going to be a question mark his entire career. So if you want to bank on Sony going down for the season and then, you know, Damien's only got to deal with some pass catching backs, then be my guest. Go ahead and do that. But I just think there's better guys you can find late in drafts than Damien Harris because it's so crowded. Pat's backfield is just generally irritating. I feel like people have been chasing that 18 touchdown LeGarrette Blount season for so long. I think it was 18. The year that he scored 1 million touchdowns, basically. People are like, oh, well, it's the Patriots offense. I mean, they can produce a good running back. Yeah, they can. Do you want to keep being the guy that's hunting for it? Because I don't. I'm sick of it. So I would leave Damien Harris out there, let somebody else take that flyer. And lastly, we've got a guy that is actually ranked fairly high compared to everybody else I've been talking about, but is still, in my opinion, severely undervalued. And this is Michael Gallup. Now, Michael Gallup made at least one headline the other day because Cowboys coach Mike McCarthy says he views Michael Gallup as a #1 wide receiver. Is that just coach speak? You could say so, yeah. It's still nice to hear, but also it's kind of accurate because Michael Gallup arguably produces just as well as Amari Cooper does when they're both on the field and both healthy. And then when Amari Cooper is not healthy and Michael Gallup is the clear #1 in that high-powered offense, I mean, that excites me. That should excite you too. And Amari Cooper's health is always a question. So here's the situation with Gallup. He's ranked as wide receiver 31 on ESPN. That's essentially, you're getting him for your flex. You're getting a very, very talented outside big wide receiver on one of the best offenses in the league with Dak Prescott, who has a lot to prove right now because of his contract situation. And I don't understand why he's that low. I just don't. I think part of the reason his ADP is being driven down a little bit is because of CeeDee Lamb, and people are worried about him taking those targets and, you know, just overall suppressing Michael Gallup's value. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Randall Cobb is gone. CeeDee Lamb will take those targets. Dak Prescott is going to want to prove that he is worth the money that he's been asking for what feels like years now. And Michael Gallup's going to be a direct beneficiary of that. And again, if Amari Cooper goes down, I mean, it's only going to get better. So I would absolutely take Michael Gallup as a wide receiver too, even. But you don't have to do that most likely. You can get him for your flex, and I would do that. But guys, that'll do it for this episode. I think next time out, I want to talk about rookies and how we can try and evaluate them heading into draft day, because with this offseason, it's so tough with no preseason games to gauge what is happening with these rookies. It feels more than ever like we're reading these puff pieces and we don't know how to digest them because, you know, actions speak louder than words, but we don't get to see those actions because there's no preseason games. So as much as you can hear that Cam Akers is getting first team reps with the Rams, and that J.K. Dobbins wants to push for a starting role, and that Jonathan Taylor is looking great in practice, we don't know how realistic it is that any of these guys are going to take starting roles. If and when they're going to do it, we have no idea. So all these rookies are just kind of on the same level playing field. That's why I really didn't want to talk about rookies in this, because I feel like they deserve their own sort of episode. The only one I wanted to talk about was Gibson, because his hype is just out of control. But the rest of the rookies, the ones with potential paths, more likely paths to early down roles as the season goes on, I do want to break those down. So if you guys are looking forward to that, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, all that stuff, you YouTuber, you know, lingo, blah, blah, blah. But regardless, guys, if you stuck around this long, thank you for listening to me ramble. Thank you for listening to me talk about Robert Tonyan, because God, if I could get even one person to listen to me talk about Robert Tonyan, I'll consider that a victory. So that'll do it for this episode of Fourth Down Fantasy. Guys, I'll see you next time.